tonight we have two presenters. First one is Zach Davis from Cox Automotive, and he is going to show you all the latest, greatest features in the React framework. Should be interesting. That'll go about 45, maybe 50 minutes. And then I'll do a couple more announcements, talk about upcoming events. And then our main presenter is from GitHub. And David Teague is going to present and talk a lot about open source and how Microsoft has embraced that. We will also like to thank GitHub and David for sponsoring tonight's event. Again, we are streaming live on Twitch and Mixer and YouTube, and all of this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube archive, which is youtube.com/Philly DOTNET. Okay, so let's turn things right over to Zach, and take it away, Zach.
Cool, thanks, Bill. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Wanted to start off with a quick question. How many of you use React in your day jobs right now? We got 2, awesome. Good, I know my audience. So we're actually going to start off with just a quick introduction to get our feet wet, get us used to talking about React. So, according to the React docs, React is a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript library for building user interfaces. But what does that really mean? React is really just a rough set of guardrails written in JavaScript for you to write UIs in JavaScript, and it does a lot of basics of user interface right out of the box for you. It is very extendable as well, and there's many additive libraries that you can use with it. And what isn't React? React really isn't a framework. It doesn't do everything for you. When you start a project directly with React, you don't have any build tools. You can't really deploy it. You can't just run unit tests. That's not all built in like a lot of you are used to with your Visual Studio solutions and .NET Core and things like that. And React definitely isn't your only option when doing user interfaces. There's a ton out there. Preact is another one that's a little smaller than React. We use a very similar syntax. Angular, a lot of us know. Microsoft kind of hopped on the bandwagon early with that. Vue, and then as we've seen more recently in some of the labs, Blazor. So in 2019, React actually had a pretty big year. They released hooks and context, totally revamped developer tools that sit in your browser of choice, either Chrome or Firefox, really. A React profile component that also hooks into those dev tools so you can profile your applications while they're running in the browser. An act method for testing. They named some of the older lifecycle methods. So a lot of the component did mounts and will mounts and all that kind of stuff they used to have to kind of go through are going to become deprecated soon. So they started marking them safe. They also deprecated JavaScript URLs, which are just kind of a bad practice. It leads to a lot of kind of unsafe application code within your JavaScript applications. And they also deprecated factory components. A lot of people were confusing them with functional components, and they did work a little differently. And a lot of people didn't use them for their true use, so they started by deprecating them this year. So hooks is one of those big new things we talked about coming this year into React. And there's many different hooks, and you can write your own as well. It allowed for more people to really use functional components, which take over handling the life cycle of your React components for you. So as you're building small components like this, this simple kind of button with a counter next to it, you can see here the use state. Oh, my mouse isn't showing up. So use state there on the kind of second line there in the example lets you still use state inside a functional React component, which previously was not possible. You had to use a class-based component with a lot of boilerplate around it. And now you just have one line that gives you a count as well as a function to set that count. And you're instantiating it to 0 there. So right when you start your application and this renders, you'll see a paragraph that says you clicked 0 times, and then the button on click calls that function that was given to you from that hook to increment the count. You see count +1 there. So every time you would go and click on that, it would increment the count and store it for every re-render. So it would remain as a more constant variable as part of that component. Context was the other big thing. Managing state throughout React applications before was a little complicated, so there were many big libraries out there to help you get that job done. Redux is kind of the most famous one, and it requires like a ton of boilerplate code. Last time I had to set up Redux, it took me 150 lines of code to do kind of what was just presented in the previous slide. Now, this is also this kind of lets you have a global state that is passed down. So you can see here, there's pretty much just 4 lines of code that you need. So you need to have a provider, and that is what holds on to your what we call context, and that's kind of any state you want it to be. You can have any sort of shape passed into there. Right now we're just passing a theme value of dark. So everyone loves dark mode. So we're going to pass in that theme value right there in the theme context.provider. And anything sandwiched in between those provider tags in that JSX is going to get that value of dark for their theme. So the themed button, which I didn't really show an example of, but that would know to be in dark mode because it is inside the toolbar, which is inside the provider. So instead of 150 lines of code, we have just a handful here on one slide that we can pass values throughout our application. The act method that I mentioned for testing is really useful for awaiting all of your test actions. If you wrap any of your test actions in this act call from React, it ensures that all of the actions are completed before moving forward. So any asynchronous type stuff that's happening, maybe by accident, is going to finish before your assertion happens. And so race conditions where sometimes your test passes and sometimes it doesn't are kind of squashed with this act method. And this works natively with pretty much any testing tool out there that used for React. Specifically, I use it with Jest and the React testing library, which are 2 of those external libraries like I talked about earlier that go well with React. So those are kind of the big hitters from this year, but then there's 2 big hitters kind of going forward. React did lay out their plans to have official pre-release channels to start experimenting with the new things coming out. They have a latest, a next, and experimental track there that you can follow along and even choose to use if you want to. Usually not recommended for production code, obviously, but if you are prototyping an application maybe that might be ready for use in months, things like the next branch are perfect for that because you can start using some of the newer features ahead of time before you're ready for production because they will be ready soon as well. 2 of those big things are concurrent mode and suspense, and they're in the experimental track right now. Concurrent mode is going to make rendering interruptible. So before, or actually right now with your React components, it always finishes rendering. Even if you change state, it's going to go through that entire render cycle and then re-render again if you change the state out from under it. In concurrent mode, you're actually going to be able to trigger 5 state changes at once and only end up with 1 re-render in the end. So again, this is in an experimental mode, but in the ideal scenario, you will be able to not really need to show loading screens anymore because the concurrent mode will keep track of all those state changes for you, and you could maybe have a smaller progress bar on the current page instead of starting to show different like loading symbols across your entire application. And you'll know when your rendering is done in memory, so that way you can put it out on the page. Suspense is the other big hitter there in the experimental track right now, and it kind of goes hand in hand with concurrent mode. So concurrent mode is meant to make your UIs feel faster, if that's kind of what you're looking for, but Suspense makes it easy to have fallback and loading states. So you can kind of choose your own where it makes sense for your application, for your users to have a better user experience. I've written a lot of fallback logic as well to show different loading states of different components and things like that, and they were kind of single use and annoying to build. This gives you a higher order component called Suspense, where the fallback prop is more JSX, as you see with these headers. So these are, a simple profile page where it's not going to show any of the profile until profile details are available, and then it's still going to continue loading the posts for your timeline, and then it'll pop in when it's ready. You don't have to handle any state or anything like that to know if it is ready. It's just going to handle that for you within the Suspense higher order component. And that makes solving race conditions kind of obsolete for this scenario, since you really won't have any handling them for you. So since we are a lot of .NET devs here, I wanted to switch tracks and kind of talk about how this all compares to what we have in Blazor now, since we've been talking about that a lot recently. So who's used Blazor recently? See some hands? I think more of you have. Haven't you been to the labs? Yeah, 2 weeks ago, right? Okay. Well, yeah, you've used Blazor then. If you watch someone code, you coded it. It counts. It's like pair programming, right? Or mob programming. Anyways, so I have a couple slides here that are basically like T-charts here to kind of compare React and Blazor. So we know React's in JavaScript. Blazor is in C#, but you still do need JavaScript to handle different things in the UI when needed. Kind of different interactions, changing state kind of on the page. In React, you use JSX to kind of handle a lot of the extra things that HTML doesn't provide you. With Blazor, you still use that razor syntax that allows you to use your C# there. And currently, Blazor is only available for server-side right now in terms of production readiness. It's in preview for the client-side version, which will work with WebAssemblies. React currently available for both, with server-side rendering being a pretty good optimization if you choose to go that route with your React applications. And the load times can also be mitigated for big React applications right off the bat with built-in lazy loading. For bigger applications that I've noticed, Blazor has a little bit of boot up time for the UI that first time, because you are downloading a lot of the WebAssemblies and things to use SignalR right off the bat that you currently can't you can't really mitigate that right now. I'm hoping that gets better in the future. For Blazor, I've been trying to look. There's no real obvious way to write your UI unit tests strictly about what is rendering and things like that. So you can still easily test your business logic and any of those methods that you're calling. With React, with that React testing library, we can pretty much test anything that's going on, included with Jest.
Zach, if you don't mind, we got a question online that was wondering if you could define lazy loading. They heard you say that.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Didn't know what it meant. Thank you.
Yep. So lazy loading, that is where, so you can basically tell your application, so the browser, not to load or download any of the resources necessary maybe for that component or entire feature until it's actually needed by the client. So if you have something that's kind of below the fold classically, so if it's not really on your main visual load, right when you open the page, maybe a footer down at the bottom, you can tell that to load later, and that's lazy loading. So you won't need to download maybe those styles right away. Save. Now, a lot of us have really good broadband, but that can save milliseconds to seconds depending on actual connection. Think about if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're on 2G or even 3G, which I haven't even been on for a while, but user experience does matter. So being able to lazy load those things in and decrease download times and sizes can be a big deal in the front end. And I hope that did answer the question. Cool. All right, so React Blazor, still both component-based. Blazor does come with built-in routing, which I did find to be very convenient when I started up. For React, I had to learn React Router right away to kind of make a spa where you could link to different pages. So a single-page application where you still have different routes to follow seems like a common use case, but React doesn't build it in for you. There's actually there's a handful of libraries out there that will do it. React Router is one of the most popular ones. And then moving on to the developer experience, there's a ton of great dev tools for React. Facebook provides a really good one. Debugging wise, Visual Studio Code has a great extension to interact with Chrome, so you can hit your breakpoints in your code directly while you're running in Chrome. Blazor, the debugging experience is great for any of the actual C# you have. It's still, if you have jQuery on the page, anything like that, it's still a little bit annoying to kind of unravel kind of console logging, things like that, or throwing debugger statements to use the debugger in Chrome versus where your code actually lives. I would love to see Microsoft come out with an extension like React has for Visual Studio Code, though, because I think that would really elevate the library a lot. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of different supporting libraries out there for React, and right now, since Blazor is in its infancy, there aren't that many options yet, but I do see more and more popping up all the time. The roadmap, as I talked about kind of earlier with concurrent mode and suspense, those roadmap items are really focused on the user experience. Since Blazor isn't fully fledged yet, most of the roadmap seems to be focused on new technologies. And then another kind of big thing for me is that React is more micro front-end ready. So I build micro front-ends for Cox Automotive, so I need to be able to create full applications that actually sit inside of other applications. And so there's using a lot of those supporting libraries, it makes it easy to self-contain those applications, those micro front-ends that we're building. And just natively, Blazor doesn't have the tooling. You could easily kind of write your own stuff to maybe namespace your classes and any of the JavaScript libraries you're using, but that's not out of the box for you. So here's that Blazor roadmap that I did talk about. We have Blazor on the server now. All right, so every action is handled by the server, and you can pre-render HTML to make things a little faster. WebAssembly is kind of the next step where we have things running on the client side, where it's loaded from the web server. So that's similar to how many React applications work today. And it has service worker support, or will in the future. I can't tell from this roadmap, actually. The next item, though, is the progressive web apps. So they kind of go right onto your phone and open up in their own window, so they look like a native app. It'll be right on your home screen with an icon, and they'll be able to work offline or online with that service worker capability. Hybrid's going to come next with so running kind of on your desktop there using Electron WebView, and it'll look like a native app just like those progressive web apps on your phone, and again working offline or online. And then Blazor Native is in the very far future with the same programming model, but it won't be HTML that's rendered. It'll actually be a native application, and that is the counterpart to React Native, where you can write mostly the same React code and build native applications as well. So I was talking up React a lot, obviously. I'm a React developer, but I wanted to give some good reasons to use Blazor because I think there are some good reasons right now to use it. Your team probably already knows C# if you're here. So you already probably know C#, and you need the UI quickly because your product owner said this has to be done in the sprint. So what do? You use the technology you're comfortable with. If it's a simple UI, maybe sort of like an admin dashboard, you don't have a lot of complicated user experience or user interactions, or need to lazy load a lot of data or anything like that, Blazor is really perfect for that right now. You can go build production level applications for that scenario. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far? Online at all? Looks like a no. So I did include some resources in my slides that I can send out. So I always recommend kind of the official docs first. Threw in React testing library docs as well. Style components is a great library for styling your components. It also allows you to write CSS, but without using CSS files, so that actual CSS just gets shipped with your component and then reused as needed by the browser. React Strap, if you want your website to look like Bootstrap or already have a custom theme that your company has written, something like that. Material UI, if you want to go the Google Look route. One of the first courses I took for React was Power Up with React, Sergio Cruz, there on Code School, which is now part of Pluralsight. That was a really helpful class, and it got me going really quickly. And then there is a React meetup in Philly, in Center City, if you are interested, called Reactadelphia. And that link is actually to the Discord as well. If you'd like to talk with other React developers, including myself, I'm active on there. Oh, I clicked on it. Now I don't. All right. And then the Blazor resources. Again, the official docs are really good. Microsoft always has great documentation. Awesome Blazor is a cool repo that just has links to awesome Blazor stuff, and that's actually where I've gone to find out what other libraries or different things are available to work with Blazor right now. Telerik has built some of their components for Blazor and is continuing to build more. I know they had a great suite for MVC applications, so I'm looking forward to that. There's also another free one called Radzin Blazor Components that does paid support as well. There's tens of components in there right now, and it looks like they're ever expanding. And then Blazor Strap, so that it looks like it has pretty much everything from Bootstrap written into Blazor components ready for you to use. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, go ahead. Sure. So thank you. So the question was about using strictly JavaScript UI libraries within React or Blazor because there have been issues trying to use them with Angular in the past. Obviously, since React is JavaScript, I think the interop there is super simple. Although I wouldn't recommend using maybe a jQuery library or something in React. I'm not sure what libraries you've tried to use in the past. Okay. So the example we have is Mermaid for graphing. With React, you can use D3. They have wrappers for their components in React. There's also recharts, similar charting library there. A little less advanced, but if you need bar graphs, simple pie charts, I would actually go with recharts over D3. You have to deal with less math. It does a little more for you. But you could still use the Mermaid library within a React component. You would just make what's called a higher order component and wrap all that stuff in and pass the data you need in there as props, which are basically parameters. That would be the same way I would approach doing a Blazor component, actually. So the approach would be similar there. You would create a component, throw the markup and the JavaScript you need from Mermaid right into that component, and just pass the data in via the parameters for the component there in Blazor. And it sounds easy. Should all work. I'm sure there's 20 gotchas along the way, but that's life as a developer, right? Any more questions? Well, thank you. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, GitHub, and you can email me too, or hit me up on LinkedIn. My name is Zach Davis, and thank you all for listening. Sorry, I'm not on the internet.
All right, so I will, thanks a lot, Zach. I appreciate your time. And I will do a quick overview of what's going on with the group and get you up to speed. So again, we advertise all of our events on meetup.com. And tonight is GitHub night, and we'll just give a little extra time to David so he can have some Q&A. It says I'm going. This is so exciting. So what do we have going with events here? So we have tonight GitHub. If you go into events and go into upcoming, you can get a better sense of what's happening. So there is an event in 2 weeks. Our hands-on lab series, of course, we do one lab a month and then one regular meeting. And the hands-on lab is going to get into some interesting communication capabilities in ASP.NET Core. gRPC is a new feature of ASP.NET Core 3.0, meant to work cross-platform. It's a very popular remote procedure call approach. And of course, SignalR is Microsoft's WebSocket implementation that they've been using for years. If you didn't catch in the last talk, SignalR is actually used heavily in the Blazor server-side implementation. Then we have a meeting in December, a week before Christmas Day, and that's going to be a special meeting where Jeff Fritz, who comes from this area, he works on the Visual Studio product team, but he also does a lot of live coding, and he has a very popular channel on Mixer and Twitch, and he gets on with people he knows all over the world and does team programming. And he's going to try and get some of those folks to join him during that meeting. So he's basically going to broadcast from here, and that should be interesting. And I'm sure we can get him to do some fun tricks and all. I have one meeting lined up for January, and Mike Molesky, who is very popular in our CodeCamp presentations, he is going to explain how he uses containers to make development more efficient. So he's going to show how he sets up development environments, continuous integration, testing, and things like that, all using Docker containers. So I thought that would be a real good talk. We may look for a companion talk for that night as the lead up. Don't have any of the labs lined up for early next year, but keep in mind we will have a code camp in the spring, as always, and this is important. This will be our 30th code camp. That's a lot. So can you imagine eating that many hoagies over your life? Can I hear a big woohoo? There you go. So for those of you in the studio audience that don't get the joke, the woohoo thing is something we've been doing in our code camps for at least 10 years. And basically, anytime somebody wins a raffle prize, they don't get the prize unless they really yell out loudly so we know where they are and who they are. And it's great fun when we do the raffles. So you can look forward to woohooing there in April. And of course, even though that says Saturday, April 18th, please keep in mind that we will, of course, have the 2-day code camp. And April 17th, that Friday, will be the full-day training classes that are in great demand. So I should be able to post that schedule closer to the end of January. And just mark your calendars, tell your loved ones that you don't have time for them that weekend. And with good reason. So any questions about our upcoming events? Okay. Any of you have interest in Azure or big data? At least one or two of you. There's a lot of money in that field. Come on, everybody put your hand up. Now you're starting to think it might be interesting. Okay. So anyways, I also help run something called Azure Data Fest. And you can look it up. Pretty easy to do a web search for that, but search for Azure Data Fest Philly. And the date, I'm trying to remember, I think it's January 7th. We had to, there was a scheduling conflict in November and December, so they moved this event to the first week in January. It is during the week, but that's a full day mini conference, sort of like a code camp, and it's just on Azure and data topics. So we're looking for speakers for that, and of course, always looking for attendees. So make a note of that. Any other questions or comments, things that you'd like to see happen in Philly.net? You're perfectly happy with what's going on here. How many just came for the food tonight? Come on, there you go. And what finger was that? All right. Yeah, I was actually tempted because they just opened Chick-fil-A right down the road. So we're going to have to try and use that for one of our meetings, just to mix things up a little bit. All right. Well, given all that, Microsoft turned its attention to open source a couple years ago in a big way. And it seems to be paying off big dividends. .NET Core and ASP.NET Core are excellent examples of that. But a lot of their SDKs and things are now all open source. And they use so much open source that they almost brought down GitHub with too many pull requests. So what did they do? They went out and bought GitHub. That's one way to solve a problem. But that's just a funny view of things. What we're going to do is introduce David Ateek, who works for GitHub, longtime Microsoft staffer, and he's going to take over and present to you the world of GitHub and open source.
So you have to listen. Well, I didn't tell you that, right?
Okay.
Just give us a minute to get set up.
That's still on.
It was back in my Microsoft days. Wasn't too long ago. At least 3 or 4 years ago. They started putting a lot of the samples out there on GitHub, right? And that's where now everything's out there for Microsoft anyway, right? If you want to go get a walkthrough or a sample, it's all out there at this point. So, and then what happened was I joined GitHub and I had some snafu with my account and kind of lost that stuff, so I started over. The two-factor authentication stuff they make you go through is kind of tough. Who actually has a GitHub account in here? All right, cool, awesome. Are you guys in there regularly? Yeah? Okay, cool. You know what? We're waiting.
We were still warming up. Do you remember sourcing?
I do. Remember file shares. Where's the where can I plug in? Oh, there we go. It's hiding.
Amount of electricity.
Are we ready to go yet, or? And it wouldn't be a GitHub meeting without stickers, so. We are a sticker company that writes software, frankly.
Who wants stickers?
You guys can grab them at the end. We ready to go? Cool. Good? We're live? Okay, cool. Well, good evening, everyone. David Teak with GitHub. Give you a little background on myself. So I joined GitHub in July. I actually spent 15 years at Microsoft. Before that, I spent a number of years as an engineer, doing consulting. I started at Merck Pharmaceuticals a long time ago, writing C++. I have kind of morphed into the sales role at this point, right? So what I do now here at GitHub is I'm our East Region lead. Tell me if this is too loud or if you want to turn it down. I'm our East Region lead for enterprise solutions here on the East Coast. So I work with all of our customers across financial services, health and life sciences. So essentially I cover an area from Virginia to Maine. I get to work with a lot of really big customers, understand what they're doing from modernizing their software development lifecycle. And it's actually quite a bit of fun working here, right? So while I was at Microsoft, I was a technical SME, as well as then worked in our data and artificial intelligence business as a solution specialist for financial services. And that's what I was actually doing recently. You guys got to get on the data stuff too, right? Kind of promote the data fest. You know, the data explosion and everything's running off of data. You know, I really feel like from an engineering perspective, get involved and understand that because, you know, from what's happening in the artificial intelligence space, everything's relying actually on data. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to give you guys just an update on what GitHub's doing, right? So as Bill mentioned, GitHub was acquired by Microsoft. Number one, what does that actually mean, right? I'm going to give you some updates on what we announced last week at GitHub Universe. So GitHub Universe is our conference for developers, engineers, and we bring everybody out to San Francisco. I think we do it every 2 years at this point. We have these different satellite conferences we'll do as well, but everybody comes out. We have about 2,000 people out there at Universe, and we get to go kind of roll out a lot of interesting things, right? If you think about really GitHub, kind of what attracted me to them was really they've been working in the enterprise space only for a few years now, right? If you're familiar with GitHub and where they started, it's basically a 10-year-old company, and it's just amazing to see what we're shipping within the product at this point, because it's not just a source control system at this point, right? Many of us know that. Many of us know that, hey, this is where open source software is developed. But I'm going to give you guys an update on what we're doing, some of our product roadmap, and we'll go from there. And I don't want to hear myself talk for 45 minutes. Please ask questions. If I can answer it, I will. I've lost some of my technical stuff over the years, but I'm going to try to show you guys a couple of demos here at the end as well. Some stuff I was doing last night. So number one, if you're not familiar with GitHub, right, this is where we basically have the kick-ass software development platform that 40 million people are using today. This is where open source software is hosted, maintained, contributed to. And as Bill mentioned, it's interesting. I spent 15 years at Microsoft. And I was in our DPE organization, which was our developer platform evangelism group. And I'd go out and talk to big companies about software development and architecture and all that great stuff. And it was interesting. About 4 years ago, I started going out and talking to customers about our contribution from a Microsoft perspective in open source. And if you're not aware, if you look at some of the stats, Microsoft was the leader in open source contributions over the past couple of years. Right? What they're doing in this space since Satya came in is actually really, really exciting. And all of those great innovations are there for you to take advantage of, right, and contribute to as well. So GitHub, 40 million developers. You can see some of the stats here. 87 million pull requests this year. Microsoft is actually moving a lot of their one engineering system to GitHub as well. I think what's important to understand from a GitHub perspective is we are a community company. So the first thing I really noticed going over to GitHub was how community focused this company is, because this company grew up as a community company. This was free software. This was a place for you to go out and connect socially with somebody else that you wanted to contribute to building something that was cool, right? And we still are. So even though we were acquired by Microsoft, we are still remaining an independent company, and we have to, right? I really feel like we have to from a developer perspective. Now we're at a .NET Azure user group inside of a Microsoft Office tonight, but we still have to remain agnostic from a developer perspective. If a customer wants to build on a different platform, build for a different cloud, we need to be able to support them no matter what they're going, right? Where they're going. So doing a lot in the education space, I think it's extremely important. We're also growing in the enterprise. So this is what really attracted me to come over to GitHub is, you're used to going home, building, maybe contributing to something that's open source on your free time. We've seen that developers want to bring that same collaboration inside their organizations, inside the enterprises they work at today. The thing that really drew me coming over to GitHub was, over the past couple of years, and Bill mentioned this, the evolution of where open source is in the enterprise, right? And when you think about bringing open source, I remember the days where I go to a customer and they're like, we are not touching open source software. We're not allowed to bring it in. Think about it. Like probably 95% of the applications you work on today are using open source software. You download a node package, it's open source software. Whatever you're including in your software, you're using open source software. And it makes sense, right? Enterprises are starting to understand that they need to adopt open source software. There's a talent shortage for developers, right? And there's going to be a growing talent shortage for developers. So you need to build off the backs of people that have already built this stuff and use that inside the enterprise and bring that into the enterprise. So we see what's happening there. And a lot of what we're doing to, from a roadmap perspective is making sure that this thing fell off. Making sure that we're supporting and putting guardrails around how you bring open source into the enterprise. All right? So let's go through some of this. I'm going to try to leave out all the fun marketing stuff, but I wanted to give everybody an update. If you were not familiar with GitHub, sometimes we just go in assuming you know what GitHub is. But if you don't have an account, go home and sign up right now as I'm talking. Go get an account and start exploring. So I think one of the interesting things with the acquisition from of Microsoft over the past year is the amount of stuff that GitHub has shipped. Right, so while it was started as a source control company, you can start to see all of the different product improvements that have been shipped. And these are all things that have been driven by our community. This is our community of 40 million developers asking for these capabilities. Now, some of the bigger things that we're going to go through tonight are the release of our package registry as part of GitHub, as well as our CI/CD platform as part of GitHub. Now, if you think about in the past, if you were a GitHub, does anybody use GitHub inside their company that they actually work at today? Okay, right? So if you're using GitHub inside the enterprise today and you're using our enterprise offering, you might be using Travis or Circle CI or something like that to integrate in from a CI/CD perspective. Our community of maintainers of open source projects and contributors are asking us for built-in CI/CD right to GitHub, right? They don't want to have to integrate with something else, but they want something that's integrated right into their repository that they can use. So I think two of the biggest things that we've been working on have been actions and our packages registry as well, right? So we'll go through a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about what we're doing from a security perspective. And this is the security stuff is what I think is extremely interesting, especially for enterprises. So GitHub Universe, we had 2,000 developers, tons of different companies coming out presenting. Companies like Expedia, IBM, BCG, Ford. These are companies that have brought GitHub into their enterprise, and this is how they're actually building software today. It's how they're taking advantage of open source software. And we had three themes at Universe: Code to Cloud, creating a better daily experience for maintainers, contributors, and enterprise users, but also still delivering back to the community. We are so focused on the community because if the community goes away, we go, our business goes with it, right? So let's talk a little bit about Code to Cloud. So we have two offerings in enterprise space. We have obviously also github.com. If you go home tonight, you sign up, you're going to go sign up for a github.com account. But if you're in an organization, we also have an enterprise offering that comes into play too, right? So over the past year, we've betaed both package registry as well as GitHub Actions. And those two combined with being able to host your source control, collaborate, from a source control perspective, collaborate in GitHub is what gives us a much broader platform for you being able to build out a complete DevOps foundation for how you're going to accelerate and modernize applications into the cloud. All right? So those were two of the really big, interesting things. Look, here's what's awesome. You go home, you sign up for a github.com account, and guess what? You get packages for free, right? Everything that we'll talk about tonight, you actually get for free. I hear a little, is that my thing going off? So if you're going out and you have a public repository, you do have a private repository, you're going to actually get to go play with this stuff for free. There's not much else you need to do. Enterprise customers obviously will pay for some of it, but they get a pretty nice broad capability from what they can do from a packages standpoint. I'll go through some of the, I'll bring up the website. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm too old to memorize some of this stuff anymore. But what we actually support from an NPM, NuGet, all the different capabilities from a package registry. But what we do from a package registry is you have the ability to download open source packages, store them in your registry, make them available to your developers to use in their platform. You could publish your own. You create your own, publish them. You put, guardrails around what can actually be used in your project. And oh, by the way, since we also now have CI/CD built right into GitHub, you can include and draw from that package registry right within your build workflows. All right. Now, I'm also making the assumption here that not everybody. I spent a long time talking about DevOps and at Microsoft. I'm not sure, how deep everybody is from that perspective. But yeah, I know you're on all pretty much .NET and cloud developers, so you'll understand most of this. GitHub Actions. We betaed this, and what was interesting is it kind of like just blew up, right? So it really caught on really quickly. And what you're seeing is the idea behind Actions is that they're all YAML based. You build your own custom actions. You also can go out to the community to get actions. I'm going to show you a sample of this a little bit later of one I wrote for an Azure function, right? But this allows you to not only do matrixed builds across different platforms, deploy to any cloud, you can use community-made actions in your workflows as well. And they're all stored right inside your source control repository for that project. So we'll go through that. And if you go to the marketplace today, it's really interesting. You can see once we announced this at Universe, a lot of the different actions that Microsoft, for Azure, AWS, Google, that are all starting to funnel into the marketplace for developers and DevOps architects to take advantage of. Okay, a couple of different options there. For actions, you can use our cloud-hosted agents. You can also use self-hosted agents as well. So if you want to run those build pipelines and workflows on premises inside your organization, you can absolutely do that. And let's see, nope, but there is also free minutes and stuff like that for actions. So you can create a repository, build something really cool in GitHub, and go try out actions for free and walk through some of the tutorials and hopefully contribute back to the community. So I was just doing a little data science project, and I was using the Azure ML SDK to do some ML ops stuff, and I was like, man, everything is in my Python script. I'm like, oh, I should take part of this chunk that I'm actually registering and deploying the model through the Azure ML SDK in my Python script, and I should go create an action out of this, right? So that I can put it into a workflow instead of just having that in my Python script. But also, I have no free time. So we'll see if I ever actually get to that. So some updates on daily experience. If you're a GitHub user today, really revamping the notification experience. This is much more like a kind of like a email inbox. So coming to GitHub was interesting because at GitHub, we do everything in GitHub, which is funny, right? Even from a sales perspective. Even if I want to go order a monitor for my desk at home, I go in to the Gear repo, I create an issue, right? And everything has markdown, right? So everything has a template. And Mike is one of my peers. We're both local guys here in Philadelphia. So everything has a template. You go in, you create an issue, everything's updated, everything's collaborated on. And so in the end, I get a ton of notifications on GitHub, right? Frankly, because everything we do from a sales perspective, anything we do inside the company, we don't use email, right? We use GitHub and some other IM tools I won't say in front of any Microsoft folks, but we do use GitHub for mostly everything that we do. So I get a ton of notifications, right? And Mike can attest to this as well. You're constantly getting notifications. The notification experience in GitHub, especially if you're a maintainer, you're doing a lot in there, is really fantastic. So I think they did a really a great job with that. There's now a mobile app. We did not have a mobile app. I was kind of surprised by that, right? So because I also get a lot of notifications through GitHub and I have to do a lot of commenting on issues, wasn't that easy to go in through a web interface on my phone and create these. So this is in beta. I think you can go down and get that. I don't know if it's through something like TestFlight. I use TestFlight to get the betas. I've been on the beta for a while. It's actually a really, really nice experience. So if you're using GitHub on a daily basis, go give it a try. So they just released this, opened up the beta to customers last week as well. It's on iOS. Android is coming soon. One of the things that they're doing, and you can see this kind of coming over from the Microsoft acquisition, is they are publishing a roadmap out there as well, right? So if you are a GitHub user, you know what's kind of coming down the path, right? So they are publishing a roadmap, but they're also allowing you to kind of feature flag yourself into feature previews, right? Hey, if I want to turn this on, I can turn on this feature preview and opt in and out of certain features. For instance, the notification feature, right? So if I go into my GitHub profile, I can go into the new feature. If I don't like it, I can go back, right? A lot of really good, interesting new capabilities around code search, code navigation, just making developers' lives easier. And these are all little things, but the little things all add up, right? All add up to a much better experience. And these are all things that we're just delivering on because our community is asking for them. All right? Okay, so talk a little bit about community. From a GitHub perspective, I think one of the interesting things that I like talking about is what we do from a security perspective, right? So we'll go into places and say, hey, what's the difference between you and what you do and somebody else, right? One of your competitors. And it's really what we're doing from a security perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit deeper here about security. So one of the things we've done is we are now a Cbe Issuer in GitHub, right? So we have a security team. We do research vulnerabilities inside the open source code bases, and we are now able to issue CVEs. And you can see that we now also host a GitHub advisory database of all critical vulnerabilities that you can go out and look at. And I'll show you where that's actually located. So that's, I think, a first step. We also just acquired a company called Semel, right? So if you weren't familiar with Semel, Semel does something called variant code analysis, okay? We are integrating that technology into our platform as well. So what we really want to do here is we want to give customers and users all of the guardrails, especially as you're adopting open source software. We want to give you all the capabilities to make sure you are aware of where you have vulnerabilities, whether it's in your code, whether it's in an open source package you're just consuming inside your application and whatever you're developing with. So I'm going to show you some examples of that here, but we do have a GitHub advisory database as well. We also have started a GitHub Security Lab. So these are security researchers that are working together from these different companies to go out and research security and find vulnerabilities in code and then republish them. I think another one I saw that just popped up that's joining this group is like JP Morgan Chase, right? So all fantastic stuff, really just furthering and helping you as from a developer perspective, know that the code you're writing, right, is safe and you can run checks on that. Skip over some of that. Okay, let's go into this real quick. So before I'm going to go a little bit deeper on the security stuff, right? And show you a couple things, and I'm going to go show you guys an actions sample and what that actually looks like for CI/CD. Before I move on, any kind of questions that you might have on some of the updates we announced last week? Mike, any questions? I might. I'm going to take the stickers off the table. All right. So let's do this. Let's get a little bit deeper into what we do from an advanced security perspective. And this is kind of one of those differentiators there, right? So we talked a little bit about this. 99%, I think the stat's now 99% of projects use, sorry for the change in the theme of the slides. 99% of software projects use open source today, right? You think about you use a specific open source package, how many other open source packages does that package actually depend on, right? So, you may not have a vulnerability in the higher level package, but one of those dependencies may actually have a vulnerability, right? So these are the types of things that we're trying to surface to developers today. And this is what we're actually working on. So if you think about the landscape today, right, especially inside of an enterprise, you have maybe a security research team, if you're lucky, right? That might actually, inside most companies, be a couple people. Larger companies like Google and Microsoft and Uber, they've got teams of people that actually do this stuff. But in a lot of the enterprises that we see, there's not a big security research team, right? So what does that mean for you as a developer? What happens, right? You may write something that needs to get deployed, that might get stuck somewhere with the security team, right? Because they got to run scans and checks and all that fun stuff, right? So that doesn't really kind of let you get to what you're trying to do from with accelerating deployments, right? How's Microsoft able to do, I don't know how many thousands of deployments, a day, or Walmart able to do that? It's because they kind of don't get stuck on some of these issues, but they have certain resources that other folks don't necessarily have. But the security researchers in most companies, it's a lot of manual discovery. It's a lot of work. They're depending on other people notifying them of issues. So they don't necessarily always see things right away, right? One of the other issues we've had is maintainers. In GitHub, there was no private way for a contributor or somebody to work with a maintainer to let them know that there was actually an issue, right? If you were somebody that's contributing and noticed an issue, how do you get a hold of that maintainer to let them know? So that's something that we actually worked on. You have now the ability to communicate with a maintainer inside of GitHub to privately let them know that there's actually some vulnerability somewhere, and they can go fix that without the rest of the world actually knowing within your project. So we're working on things like that, as well as updating developers on vulnerabilities. Who's heard of Dependabot and what we do with Dependabot? Cool. You don't count back there. You've been through enough training. Anybody hear of Dependabot? So let me see if I have any slides here. I think this is a good way. Okay, yeah, cool. So we acquired a company, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Small company is, I don't know how many people, but it's a company called Dependabot. And what Dependabot does is, because we have access inside of GitHub to all these open source projects, because we know where vulnerabilities exist in all this software, we're able to detect those vulnerabilities and surface them to developers. So, and I'll show you an example of what this actually looks like. So let's say, for instance, the example I'm going to use is I'm using a node package inside of my application that is out of date and has a vulnerability associated with it, right? The stat is 70% of vulnerabilities go unpatched for over a month, right? So you might be aware of the vulnerability, But man, that's a lot of work sometimes to go hunt down some of that stuff, update your code. It doesn't get done a lot of times. What we do inside of your repo is, and it's opt-in as well, right? Is we will look at your package manifest files. You look at your manifest files for your packages, and we will alert you and also create a pull request for you with guidance on how to update that vulnerability and what version you should actually go to. So that's actually not something we announced last week, but it's a really nice feature for developers to take advantage of. And we hear a lot of times from customers that say, man, like we have a team somewhere else using something else for vulnerability detection, and it's like they haven't even gotten to patching their code. Dependabot inside of GitHub actually did the pull request and actually merged the code for us, and we don't have to actually worry about a lot of that. So really cool feature to go check out. And all of the things I'm talking about, there are free learning labs on our website. I'm going to show you the link at the end on how to actually just go do a little tutorial with any of this stuff. We also show you a dependency graph. I'm going to show you that live anyway. We don't need to talk about that. But what's interesting about that is if you do have a vulnerability, you actually go look at a dependency graph. You can see all the lower dependencies within that package that you might have and where you might have issues. We do partner with WhiteSource, get a lot of vulnerability data, not only from our code bases, but as well as WhiteSource. We'll do automatic token scanning too. So as you commit code, if you have any kind of public, how many keys have been pushed out to a website, right? We will do automatic token scanning, cred scans as well on your commits. Now, the really interesting piece here is what we do from this SEML acquisition. So this is something that's being rebranded and called CodeQL. So if you're familiar with static code analysis tools, you run your code through code analysis. It looks for different issues within that code. What SEML did as a company, and one of the reasons we bought them was because what we found when companies were using SEML was that they had like 70% less false positives, right? False positives are the issue with code analysis a lot of times. So SEML had a security research team, but what they did differently was they actually treat your code as data. So you can create queries with understanding what known vulnerabilities are and actually query your code base to find all the different variants of those vulnerabilities within your code base, okay? Without going too deep, but what's I think interesting about that is now those code queries are open sourced too. So you as a company can build off of somebody else that's actually gone and built a query to find variant analysis and vulnerabilities inside a code base based off of a CVE, and you can go query your own code base. So you're actually here's kind of how it works. You have customers like Google and Uber and Microsoft writing these queries. They're contributing those queries back to the open source community. You have other open source contributors as well. You have our GitHub security team, who is a Cbe Issuer at this point, contributing as well. And you, as a developer, get to bring those queries into your organization.
Do you engage the companies that actually scanning the websites, looking for vulnerability?
So do we, as a GitHub?
Yes, are you working with the companies that large enterprises hire to do scanning?
I can't answer. No, I don't know that answer specifically. It's a great question. I don't know how they handle the process, but so really interesting stuff. I talked a little bit about this custom analysis for your database, but I think the important thing here is what's happening and how we're integrating this into the product is now you will have these queries. You will be able to run them as essentially actions inside your CI/CD platform. So if I have a .NET project and I know there's certain CVE or certain vulnerabilities within .NET projects, I can include them in my build, automatically run that as part of my build process, and cut out all the headaches of the security team down that road waiting to do all those scans and vulnerability checks. Make sense? Cool. All right. So let's do this. Let me just show you a couple things, and then we can get out of here if there's not any questions. So let's go look at an action first. So actually, before we do that, let's go.
Hey, David, while you're switching to that,
Yeah.
we got a question about. You had mentioned that one way to notify the maintainer would be through a PM, and so the question was: does that deviate from the openness of an open source contribution by notifying in a PM versus creating an issue? I guess you could even maybe discuss the pros and cons of the approaches.
I think the con of creating an issue, I think the con of creating that issue publicly is that now other people know of where that vulnerability might exist and can use that in bad ways, right? To go cause issues with somebody else's software or an application.
So maybe it's like about promoting responsible disclosure and giving the project a little time to address.
Yeah, it's not trying. I don't think it's meant to. You're trying to hide that. But what you don't want to do is disclose it necessarily in public, where other people, bad actors, could take advantage of that, right, and use it somewhere else. Okay. All right. So can you guys see this pretty well? So this is if you go out to this. Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. At some point, it becomes, you want that promoted as some type of vulnerability so everybody else is aware of it, but it becomes a known vulnerability for everybody else to be able to leverage and patch in their code, right? So first off, if you go to lab.github.com, right, some of these different tutorials you can actually run through. If you do a search, if you want to do this kind of vulnerability detection one, you can just do a search for security strategies, I think it is, and it'll point you to the security strategy essentials. It's a hard one to say. And these are kind of cool, right? Because what happens is, what it does is it actually clones a repo for you in your account, right? Puts all the course material in there, and there's a bot that actually runs you through the tutorial right in there, right? So you're actually doing everything right inside the account. No, this is not actions right now. Yeah, yep. This is something we built for. So what we're looking at here is essentially a repo, right? I have Dependabot turned on this, and right when I come into my repo, it tells me I have a security alert, right? It's notifying me I have an issue. I can go to the Insights tab. I can go to the Dependency Graph, and I can see actually where this issue is, right? So we talked a little bit about the Dependency Graph. You can see all the other dependencies that this package relies on, and there's a known vulnerability related to this CVE in my code base in this package, and it's recommending me to at least upgrade to 2.6.9. What's cool about this is it also created a pull request for me, documented everything. I can edit the file. Basically what I'm doing now is at this point is I would go in, edit the file, merge, and I'm done, right? So really, nice simple thing to, that developers are taking advantage of to help them understand where they have vulnerabilities today. So let's go also, just wanted to show you that real quick. Let's go to a another sample project. Last thing we'll talk about, and since it's a .NET Azure user group, I created a little Azure function last night, and then Azure went down for, I don't know, like 5 or 10 minutes. So I was wondering, hey, what's actually going on here? So this is a little timer function. Let me pull up the code base. Pretty simple, right? And we're just going to do a deployment to Azure. So what I'm actually doing is I have this project hosted on GitHub, and I wanted to create an action so that anytime I did a push, a commit, I'm going to deploy this to Azure. So let's see here. Oh, it booted me out of my account again. Oh, wrong account. I don't have that one. Fun machine learning stuff if you haven't played. Okay, so here's my timer function. The stand is not really great for the mouse. It keeps going down. Okay, so my timer, fantastic. So what does an action actually look like? So number one, there's really two parts to this. There's really pre-built actions that you can take advantage of and use inside your workflow. But you also have the ability to create your own custom actions. So custom actions are either run as a Docker action or as a JavaScript action. Okay? There's some samples out there for you guys to take a look at. Just those are the Docker ones are run on Linux. JavaScript, these can be run anywhere. They're run on hosted agents or self-hosted agents as well. Now, if we go look at this new tab here, you can see that I have, this is where I could actually come in and look at the different workflows that I've actually run, right? So I can go in, see when what they've actually run, where they failed, look at all the details and logs of what's actually run in the past. I'll show you that here in a second. But how do you actually go create one? So the first thing you need is you're going to create. They're all YAML based, right? So this is the workflow I have created for deploying my test timer function. So what you see here is number one, I'm doing a push, right? My trigger is basically on a push off the master branch, and then these different things are listed under jobs. So for instance, this name, these are all individual actions. These are pre-built things that Microsoft has already built for me, and I'm just including in my workflow, right? So now you're really tricking me on my Mac here. The Control Plus on this? No, hold on. Hold on.
Oh,
better? Okay. Yep. So basically what I'm doing is I'm starting this workflow. Anytime I do a commit, I'm starting this workflow. It's going to check out the, it's using my checkout, it's using my master branch. It's going to set up my .NET environment. The test timer is a .NET project using a certain, you can tell it what version to use. These are all pre-built ones that are added in here. And then I'm going to essentially take my app package output, my publish profile as well. What's interesting here is the GitHub Actions platform has a secret store already included. So what I did was I downloaded my publish profile from my timer function, pushed it right into a secret store inside my repo, and that's where those credentials are actually coming from. Okay, and this is for instance, this is the Azure Functions action that Microsoft has already built for me, and I'm just adding it into my workflow. As you can see, because it is a code workflow, it's all maintained. Any changes I make to it are captured, and you have all the great capabilities from collaboration for how you actually maintain your workflow files, right? Now, what's key here is that not only is the community creating actions for you to use inside your workflows, but there's also starter template workflows that you can grab from the community as well. frankly, this is a starter template workflow. So if you go to, for instance, if you want to try this out at a certain point, and we'll use this, we'll use my calendar. Yeah, I know. It's not even half. Let's see here. GitHub Marketplace. So if you go to the GitHub Marketplace, you can now see we have a marketplace for actions. I can type Azure in here. And you can see all of the, not only actions provided by Microsoft, but you could also see any community actions that are now starting to fill up the marketplace as well. So, the idea here is you think about what made Jenkins popular, right? It's all of the flexibility and plugins and everything that Jenkins had. They really see, the community focus of what is being built into actions, really building out something as flexible as Jenkins was, with all of the different community contributions to the platform. So, for instance, if I wanted to go into, let's see if there's let's just look at the Azure App Service. I think there's an Azure App Service one, Azure Web App, right? So if I come here, I get my end-to-end sample workflows. It'll tell me, how do I do this for an app service for .NET? How do I do it for Node, Python, whatever it might be? It gives me examples, gives me the sample templates, right? So if I want to deploy a Node website, here's the starter Node GitHub workflow for that you can take advantage of. Now, you can also, and it'll walk through all the instructions and how to authenticate and all of that great stuff, but you also go right to where these are actually contributed from an open source perspective, right, as well. So if you want to contribute to the project, you need to upgrade versions, you need to, collaborate with someone, you have the ability to also fork the source code, right, and make modifications to it. Okay? So really cool from an actions perspective. All right. Any questions on actions? I know I kind of went through that really quickly. I say this, right? Like, take a look at it, right? If you are somebody that does CI/CD and does a lot of this, does some of this work, what we're doing for being able to, power these workflows and enable the community to build on top of this, as well as what we do for you being able to do matrix builds across all kinds of different platforms. So, for instance, we host Mac OS systems in our data center as well. Yes?
So a lot of repositories have shows that like will fail versus this. How is that done? And that part of
So, not necessarily sure on that one, but maybe, let's see here. Let's take a look at one of these. Let's take a look at my actions here. So when you say the README, the MD file, so, okay. Okay, you're saying pushing it back into the README, okay.
So you build as example URL, so you go to README, it doesn't have to actually be what's referenced. Like some of them do it outside GitHub entirely.
Yeah. They're just pushing back the README file into. It could be, right? So yeah, not sure on that one. Definitely check it out, right? You get full log, highlighting, syntax, even emojis in the files. So really interesting platform. Go out to the marketplace too. Check out and go look at the marketplace and see what actions are actually out there for the projects that you might be working on today. And oh, by the way, you get to go play with this for free, right? There's learning labs on it. There's starter templates. I built this last night in about 10 minutes with a simple test timer function. And, before I knew it, I had my code, was pushing my code. It was kicking off a workflow. and running pretty quickly. Okay, so cool. Last thing I want to show you, I think this is kind of interesting as well. We were talking a lot about security, and this is related to the number one. Here's the GitHub Advisory database. If you want to come in and look and see what CVEs are actually out there today, the vulnerabilities, you can go out and look at these and research inside the database. Let's go a little bit further here and do this. So actually, you know what? Oh, before we do that, one last thing. So go here. If you go to the GitHub Security Lab, you can understand what we are doing inside of GitHub. We've issued 105. We found 105 critical vulnerabilities. GitHub security team has in code. You can see what those actually are. You can see the different companies that are now collaborating, right, from a security perspective to find these vulnerabilities. And then you can go out and try the CodeQL stuff as well, right? So if I go to this site, you can see all of the different queries that are being written by security researchers. And what's kind of interesting here is, let's say let's just do a search for .NET here. I have not played with this that much yet. So using a package, debug miner. Okay, so let's look at this one. This is basically that you've got a config file that is publishing a debug file, and there's a vulnerability associated actually with this. So what's kind of cool here is you can go out and you can play with this, right? So you can open this query in the console, and you can actually look at the query. So what this is basically doing is you have this query somebody else wrote. You can take this query and run it on your projects, and it'll go find and then analyze all your projects to see if this vulnerability exists in your code. Very, very extremely simple example, but when you get into things like cross-site scripting, things like that, you can see how this can be really powerful. There is a language associated with this, right? So you can see it's using C# for the query language, or that's actually what it's actually querying against, but it supports a bunch of different languages. And then if you wanted to, and you had some open source projects, I have not tried this yet, you could select the projects to query. You can log into your projects in your GitHub repo and run that query against your projects and see if you have any vulnerabilities. Okay, so guys, really quick, just to summarize, these are some of the things that we at GitHub are working on. There's a lot of good links. I don't know, Bill, if you share links out, if you want me to send you some of the links, pretty easy. You can go to lab.github.com, sign up for a GitHub account, go out there, explore, go look at some of the open source projects that people are working on. GitHub is becoming developers' resumes, right? You will go in for a job and companies will want to see, what are you contributing to? And guess what? There's no better way to show that than showing them what you're doing out on GitHub today, right? You don't necessarily have to be contributing to projects, but get a presence out there, right? I'll send out some links there. Go try some of this stuff out that I showed. It's all on our website. Really cool stuff, frankly. And with that, I'll take questions. Yes. Yes, if you go to lab.github.com, hopefully, I know this is kind of tough to see. First thing you need is, I'll walk you through an example here. So first thing you need is an account, right? So you want to go in, sign up account, turn on two-factor authentication, please, right? Use two-factor authentication. Once you have an account, I can take there's different learning paths. If you're not familiar with GitHub at all, right? So first day on GitHub, you can do this. This learning path, if you are familiar with it, you can go into, for instance, learning about, here's a simple GitHub action one. This one creates a workflow and allows you to create a custom action as well. So you can see I already ran through that course, but what happens is when you set this up, it creates that course inside your account. So let's see if we have one we can, let's do introduction to Python. Let's see what happens here. So join this course. I'm going to create a public repo. What it's doing is clones the course materials, creates a repository inside my account, puts that stuff in there, and then adds the final touch, and then gives me a nice little workflow on how to start and go through the tutorial. But what I like about it is you do everything right inside GitHub. You're not like leaving for another page or something like that. And what it does is, as you start this, I think the good one was, example was, it'll automatically create pull requests for you, issues as the next step for you to actually take in your journey along there. So lab.github.com is a good one to get started at. I'm sure Pluralsight and all those companies have great stuff as well, but if you just want something free, boom, go there. Okay? Yeah? Questions? Any other questions? Yes?
Data center
We use our own data center.
Repeat the question.
Oh, question is, what data center does GitHub use? We use our own, we have our own data center.
Not Azure.
Not right now. It's our own data center. Any other?
Are they thinking of moving this to
Do you not get, like, I'm not commenting on that one? So, I don't know. I'm sure.
That's not officially.
No. No comment.
Is it only in the US? Or is
Yeah, we are in the US, our data center, which is, one of the things we hear about with being able to put data. Yep, exactly. It is on the roadmap. They will have something here, I think, in the spring.
So how many languages, not programming languages, how many foreign languages do you support?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question. Does anybody know? Send you a hoodie if you know. So people should be just guessing at this point. No, I don't actually know. Yeah, too late. No, I don't actually know the answer to that.
Because for large enterprises like that would be tough to look at.
Yep. I think there's at least a number of them, right? And I think I just saw last week that they announced another one. So, yep. Was there another question? Yes, sir.
why mess up my repo? I think it's straight.
For your free account? Yeah, I think I'm not sure GitHub, I think it's all like user community based, right? Like you reach out to our, I think it would be through like, you don't have a phone call. Yeah. Yep. To get support. What else? Any other questions? Any questions on any of the action stuff, package registry? If you, yes.
So far, we've been using a lot of third-party UIs like Github and Cbe and such other people. Is GitHub coming up with something like that to support all these features that are like actions and things?
So a UI for
Another UI like we have UI, but it's not just
The-
basic version, right?
the web you're talking about, just using web. There is GitHub Desktop, right? There is a desktop app as well.
Just very basic, right? And there's a lot of other features that are
Right now, yeah. No, mostly everything's driven through the web tool. Yeah, or Visual Studio. Yeah, I mean Visual Studio Code. There's plugins for VS Code. So if you go to, let me see here. Go to VS Code. There's a nice plugin there. I was working on something earlier. So, yeah, there's plugins there. I mean, mostly everything from a developer experience, you're either using the IDE or collaborating through the web, but honestly, the mobile device is actually really helpful, frankly, especially from what we hear from maintainers too, right? Being able to directly look at issues and prioritize and triage issues from that perspective. What else, guys? Yes. Yeah, we try to, I think they just released a new version of Git, the open source version. I think that we just applied. I think it's one of those things where if you don't update whatever tooling you're actually using, that's where you're going to run into issues. But yeah, as they roll out new updates to Git, we obviously bring them into GitHub and take advantage. If you get too far behind, it's just like anything, I'm assuming. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could go look at all of the different. Yeah, just because I'm a developer. I don't run unit tests. Come on, are you crazy? No, yeah, no, there's tons of actions out there. I would go out and explore the actions, right? Yeah, but no, it's a full CI/CD platform. It's not just about deployment. It's about running your security scans, running your unit tests, doing your builds, doing all the things you would want to do in a CI/CD platform, and then do the deployment. Yep. You can go to the marketplace and go to. Where was I was at the marketplace here for actions, and you can see what AWS is creating today for actions. Yeah. Yep. So, okay. I was actually just talking to HashiCorp the other day about some Terraform stuff. You had a question. I saw your hand up. I just wanted to.
This actions, that's the same space as
It's a good question. So, when you say being in Azure, are you referring to Azure DevOps pipelines? So, number one, go back to the community thing I said, right? Not every open source maintainer, they want something. They've been asking us for something inside of GitHub, right? So, number one reason that this was actually created was because they don't want a third-party integration from a CI/CD platform into their repo. So that's why that happens. So they created this. They wanted to make it agnostic. You as a developer, you as an enterprise can choose whatever tooling you want. If you want to use actions with your repo, great. If you want to use Azure DevOps pipelines and integrate them in, there's a great integration story there. Boom, you could do that as well. Azure DevOps pipelines are obviously probably more focused on Azure than AWS. So if you are a multi-cloud company and you need to do deployments to multiple clouds and maybe deploy to AKS or something, you want to think about something that can maybe do some a little bit more flexible for you as well. Okay. Right. Nothing wrong with either. Let me tell you this too. So I'll fill you in on something. Actions is not a brand new product that they just created, right? It's actually a fork of pipelines. So there's about 5 years of history behind the technology that's actually running actions and workflow. Okay, that team that built pipelines is building. They're over at GitHub now. They're building GitHub Actions. Okay, so I think it's important to understand this is not just something that is version 1. It's actually like version 5. Okay, cool. Anything else? Good questions though. Appreciate it. Okay. It's 10 of 8. I'll let y'all out of here. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks a bunch.